This idea inspired Goethe to travel the Rhine Valley collecting folk songs from local women in an effort to more fully grasp German culture in its purest form. In the small village of Sessenheim he met and fell deeply in love with Friederike Bryan, whom he would leave just 10 months later. Fearful of the commitment of marriage, the theme of the woman abandoned appears often in Goethe's literary works. Most notably in The End of Faust. The first leading scholars to believe that this choice weighed heavily on him. These were some of Goethe's most productive years, seeing a high production of poetry as well as several play fragments. However, Goethe began this period intent on law. He was promoted to Licentiatus Juris and set up a small law practice in Frankfurt. His career as a lawyer was notably less successful than his other ventures, and in 1772 Goethe traveled to Darmstadt to join the Supreme Court of the Holy Roman Empire to gain more legal experience. On the way he heard a story about a famous 16th-century dashing highwayman baron who achieved fame during the German peasants' war, and within weeks Goethe had written the play Getz von Berlichingen. The play ultimately sets the foundations for the archetype of the romantic hero. In Darmstadt he fell in love with the already engaged Charlotte Buff called Lotta. After spending a tortured summer with her and her fiancé, Goethe heard about a young lawyer who shot himself for reasons rumored to be love of a married woman. These two events probably inspired Goethe to write The Sorrows of Young Werther Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, 1774, a novel whose release almost immediately catapulted Goethe into literary stardom. Told in the form of letters written by Werther, the intimate depiction of the main character's mental collapse told in the first person captured imaginations across Europe. The novel is a hallmark of the Sturm und Drang era, which honored emotion above reason and societal mores. Although Goethe was somewhat dismissive of the Romantic generation that came directly after him, and the Romantics were themselves often critical of Goethe, Werther caught their attention, and is thought to be the spark that ignited the passion for Romanticism which swept across Europe at the turn of the century. Indeed, Werther was so inspiring that it sadly remains notorious for having set off a wave of suicides across Germany. Due to his reputation in 1774, when he was 26, Goethe was invited to the court of the 18-year-old Duke of Weimar, Karl August. Goethe impressed the young Duke, and Karl August invited him to join the court. Although he was engaged to be married to a young woman in Frankfurt, Goethe, probably feeling characteristically stifled, left his hometown and moved to Weimar, where he would remain for the rest of his life. He is happiest, be he king or peasant, who finds peace in his home. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The way you see people is the way you treat them, and the way you treat them is what they become. Personality is everything in art and poetry. There are only two lasting bequests we can hope to give our children. One of these is roots, the other wings. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Nature knows no pause in progress and development, and attaches her curse on all inaction. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Behavior is the mirror in which everyone shows their image. Correction does much, but encouragement does more. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. The soul that sees beauty may sometimes walk alone. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, August 28, 1749 – March 22, 1832, was a German novelist, playwright, poet, and statesman who has been described as Germany's William Shakespeare. Having achieved both literary and commercial success in his lifetime, Goethe remains one of the most influential figures in modern-era literature. Goethe was born into a wealthy bourgeois family in Frankfurt, Germany. His father, Johann Caspar Goethe, was a man of leisure who had inherited money from his own father, and his mother, Katharina Elisabeth, was the daughter of the most senior official in Frankfurt. The couple had 7 children, although only Goethe and his sister Cornelia lived to adulthood. Goethe's education was dictated by his father and saw him learning Latin, Greek, French, and Italian by the age of 8. His father had very specific hopes for his son's education, which included his studying law and finding a wife in his travels, before settling down to a quietly prosperous life. Accordingly, Goethe started at university in Leipzig in 1765 to study law. There he fell in love with Anne Catherine Schönkopf, the daughter of an innkeeper, and dedicated a volume of joyful poems to her called Annette. Ultimately, however, she married another man. Goethe's first mature play, The Partners in Crime Die Mischuldig in 1787, is a comedy depicting a woman's regrets after she married the wrong man. Upset by her refusal of him and having fallen ill with tuberculosis, Goethe returned home to convalesce. In 1770 he moved to Strasbourg to finish his law degree. It was there that he met philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder, the leader of the Sturm und Drang Storm and Stress intellectual movement. The two became close friends. Herder permanently impacted Goethe's literary development, kindling an interest in Shakespeare and introducing him to a developing philosophy that language and literature are in fact expressions of a highly specific national culture. Herder's philosophy stood in contrast to Hume's assertion that mankind are so much the same in all times and places that history informs us of nothing new or strange. The French Revolution was a divisive occasion. Within the German intellectual sphere, Goethe's friend Herder, for example, was heartily in support. But Goethe himself was more ambivalent. He remained true to the interests of his noble patrons and friends, while still believing in reform. Goethe accompanied Karl August multiple times on campaigns against France, and was shocked by the horrors of war. Despite his newfound freedom and time, Goethe found himself creatively frustrated, and produced several plays that did not succeed on the stage. Instead he turned to science. He produced a theory about the structure of plants and of optics as an alternative to Newton''s, which he published as Optical Essays, and Essay in the Elucidation of the Metamorphosis of Plants. However, neither of Goethe's theories is upheld by modern-day science. In 1794 Goethe became friends with Friedrich Schiller, one of the most productive literary partnerships in modern Western history, though the two had met in 1779 when Schiller was a medical student. In Karlsruhe, Goethe had remarked, somewhat dismissively, that he felt no kinship with the younger man, considering him talented, but a bit of an upstart. Schiller reached out to Goethe suggesting that they start a journal together which was to be called Die Huren. The journal received mixed success, and 3 years in ceased production. The two, however, recognized the incredible harmony they found in each other and remained in creative partnership for 10 years. With Schiller's help, Goethe finished his very influential Bildungsroman coming-of-age story Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, Wilhelm Meister's Lehrjahre, 1796, as well as Hermann Dorothea Hermann und Dorothea 1782, for one of his most lucrative works, among other shorter masterpieces in verse. This period also saw him taking up work again on perhaps his greatest masterpiece, Faust, though he was not to finish it for several decades. This period also saw the expression of Goethe's love of classicism and his hope to bring the classical spirit to Weimar. In 1798 he started the journal Die Propolis, the Propolia, which was meant to give a place for the exploration of the ideals of the antique world. It lasted only 2 years. Goethe's almost rigid interest in classicism at this time went against the Romantic revolutions being carried out across Europe, and Germany in particular, in art, literature and philosophy. This also reflected Goethe's belief that Romanticism was simply a beautiful distraction. The next few years were difficult for Goethe. By 1803 Weimar's flourishing period of high culture had passed. Herder died in 1803, and even worse, Schiller's death in 1805 left Goethe deeply grieving, feeling he had lost half of himself. In 1805, Goethe sent his manuscript of color theory to his publisher, and the next year he sent the completed Faust. Karl August supplied Goethe with a cottage just outside of the city gates, and not long thereafter made Goethe one of his 3 counselors, a position that kept Goethe busy. He applied himself with limitless energy and curiosity to court life, quickly rising the ranks. In 1776 he met Charlotte von Stein, an older woman already married. Even still they formed a deeply intimate bond, though never a physical one that lasted for 10 years. During his time in the court of Weimar, Goethe put his political opinions to the test. He was responsible for the War Commission of Saxe-Weimar, the Mines and Highways Commissions, dabbled in the local theater, and for a few years became the Chancellor of the Duchy's Exchequer, which made him briefly more or less Prime Minister of the Duchy. Due to this amount of responsibility, it soon became necessary to ennoble Goethe, undertaken by Emperor Joseph II and indicated by the Vonata to his name. In 1786-1788 Goethe was given permission by Karl August to travel to Italy, a trip that would prove to have lasting influence on his aesthetic development. Goethe undertook the trip due to his renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman art, prompted by the work of Johann Joachim Winckelmann. Despite his anticipation for the grandeur of Rome, Goethe was severely disappointed by the state of its relative dilapidation, and left not long thereafter. Instead, it was in Sicily that Goethe found The spirit he was searching for, his imagination, was captured by the island's Greek atmosphere, and he even fancied that Homer could have come from there. During the trip he met artists Angelica Kauffmann and Johann Heinrich Wilhelm Tischbein, as well as Christiane Vulpius, who would soon become his mistress. Although the journey was not extremely productive literarily for Goethe the first year of this 2-year journey, he chronicled in his journal, and later revised as an apology against Romanticism, published as the popular Italian Journey 1830. The second year, spent mostly in Venice, remains a mystery to historians. What is clear, however, is how this trip inspired a deep love of ancient Greece and Rome that was to have a lasting influence on Goethe, especially in his founding of the genre Weimar classicism. Upon Goethe's return from Italy, Carl August allowed him to be relieved of all administrative duties and instead focus solely on his poetry. The first 2 years of this period saw Goethe close to finishing a complete collection of his works, including a revision of Werther, 16 plays including a fragment of Faust and a volume of poetry. He also produced a short collection of poetry called Venetian Epigrams, containing some poems about his lover Christiane. The pair had a son and lived together as a family, but were unmarried, a move that was frowned upon by Weimar society at large. The couple was unable to have more than one child survive to adulthood.